Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today.
It does sound sophisticated.
Sophisticated, yeah.
With the ACE community for 3 years now.
Actually outlined everything.
Something that we find in the society.
First, talk about the problems that you're trying to solve.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us for another episode of Deep Random Talks. Today, I'm very fortunate to have Moien with me. This is going to be in the series that we are going to talk about investment and fundraising for startups. How are you doing, Moien? What's new with you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Very excited to talk more about investments, specifically on deeper technology companies.
That's fantastic. What are you drinking this morning?
I'm just drinking good old coffee.
That's great. Do you make your espresso or?
I just use capsule, pre-capsuled coffee. So I guess I'm lazier than that.
Sounds great. I'm drinking some cold brewed black tea. So yeah, I mean it's pretty warm in here. Though it is early morning on Sunday, but pretty warm. Anyway, so we wanted to talk about essentially fundraising for startups, especially when startups are building products that are more complex, and as you say, they're more deep tech products. And you were working in that space. Tell us a little about what you do there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm working as a senior associate with Green Sky Capital. We are a Toronto-based venture capital firm that invests in earliest stage Canadian companies. I also work as a venture partner with another group called Axion Archangel, where we write smaller checks, earlier stages, but still the focus is IP-backed Canadian companies. I guess we've realized over time that the IP-backed kind of deeper tech companies, specifically in Canada, are not getting enough attention and support as they need to, and as the challenges are of Canada or globally are becoming more and more complex. We have to find more deep tech companies and be able to support them to resolve these issues, and definitely that's an area that we would like to support and moving forward. So my role is mainly to find these deeper technology companies, be able to understand the technology and then bring them for potential investments. And as I've been doing this over the past 2 years, roughly, I've seen some trends in some challenges that these companies are facing. Definitely one side of the challenge goes into the limited number of capital and venture capital firms or angel groups that are interested in investing in these companies. But the other side would be, what are some of the things that these startups can do to better entice the investors and the capital toward them?
Very cool. That's definitely a great mission and vision. One thing that I, would like to disambiguate a bit is that this phrase deep tech is something that I'm hearing a lot of investors talk about. A lot more honestly with Canadian investors. I haven't heard a lot of investors in other areas focus on that as much. So I'm curious, like, is that a trend that you see as well? Like, is that mostly a Canadian positioning of an investment thesis, or is that more global? You've seen it, you've been working that space, and what does it mean? Like, what is considered deep tech in general?
Yeah, thank you for that question. That's definitely a question that I've been thinking about for some time now. Deep tech definitely means different things to different people, but to I guess myself and people who I work with, deep tech is by definition a company that utilizes intellectual property that is to some extent protectable. I mean, as we know, any IP or patent have workarounds. Better technologies can come and catch up over time. But what we want to make sure is that the technology is backed by an IP. It's the result of some years of research and development, and now we have a product that is being commercialized. Sometimes this comes out of universities, but not all the time. And the focus of deep tech companies can be, I don't know, quantum computing. It can be clean tech. It can be healthcare. And in all of these examples, you see that usually that's the case, a researcher at university or an institution is taking the technology out of that institution, commercializing it, trying to find product market fit. And in the process, they're also supporting that technology with that IP that they have. So very experienced teams coming up with technologies that are coming out of institutions or universities based out of research, and now they're trying to actually productize it. And why deep tech and why that's important? It's because let's contrast that with another group of companies that I'm going to call shallow tech. At this point, another application that allows you to replace paper is not very complicated anymore. Like obviously digitizing solutions are still very important. It's very challenging in some industries to digitize everything and gain the efficiencies. But the problem is that a small shop somewhere in the world at a low cost can digitize solutions, can digitize processes for you, and you can move on with that efficiency gain that you have. But we have bigger problems that require very experienced people to sit together, do a lot of R&D, and then commercialize that solution and be able to actually productize it and sell it to the outside world. So the focus, in contrast to shallow tech, is on deep tech. More and more, this is not a Canadian trend, more and more VCs, angels from outside Canada, UK, US, I see a lot of groups are focusing on deep tech. Specifically, most often their focus is on quantum computing or clean tech. These are definitely challenges that the today's communities have. They need better computing powers. They need solutions to get rid of waste, and that doesn't come with a shallow technology. It really comes with lots of research and IP.
Right. So if I understand what you're saying correctly, is the focus largely is on technologies that have the potential to open up market for a lot of new applications, but they're still just out of R&D stage. They don't necessarily have very proven markets. There are dotted lines like quantum computing that if it happens, then et cetera, but they're not, like, as you said, like for digitization, there's a very clear market. People have been doing it for a while. The business models are more or less clear. There's a marginally better solution that somebody might be building. But when you say deep tech, the focus is on, technologies that could create even completely new markets, drastically different competitive advantages and applications that are completely different than what we have seen. And a way for you to define that is based on, is there a researcher in most cases who spent years developing this intellectual property at the university and is trying to commercialize that now. So partly, to some extent, that definition will make sense to me, but also I feel like in my interactions with a lot of investors, what I feel like is that their definition of intellectual property is very limited. Like, essentially, what you're calling intellectual property in a lot of people's minds is just patent. That's it. Like, that's what they consider intellectual property. Like, for example, a very interesting and unique data set that somebody's collecting could be coming out of academia. It could be, a company like us who's creating these data sets. They don't consider that intellectual property. While my argument is that if the point of intellectual property is defensibility, is competitive advantage, algorithms in a lot of cases can be reverse engineered. The far harder thing to reproduce is data sets, especially if they're unique and challenging to collect. So is my impression correct? Is that how deep tech is generally defined and understood from an investor point of view?
You're accurate to some extent that there are folks out there that think IP equals patent. And there's a problem with that mindset. The fact that not all patents are issued equal. So the value of all patents are not the same. We all know that you can argue a lot with the patent officer and ultimately get your patent granted. What we usually do is that we deeply in the case of patents, we deeply review the patents just to make sure there are no workarounds, and whatever is actually claimed in the patent is something that is novel and new, and there is nothing around it. And that's just the aspect of competition. And so, can someone actually build a solution again? But the idea of having IP is not just on the competition side, but it's also on the fact that you are creating something that is new in a way that it can actually bring in breakthrough solution. This doesn't equate to patent only. As you said, a data set can be very valuable. It can be something that no other entity in the world has created, and it can bring in a solution that would change everything for a specific field. So it can be a data set. It can be your patent for sure, but it can also be your trade secret of the specific method that you have developed that nobody else has the knowledge of. So what if it's not patented and it's not a data set, and it's a specific formulation that you're not able to release? So all of that is IP, and as I said, it's not just a way of making sure there is no competition. Obviously, competition is also important. Competition shows us that there is actually need in this market. So it's an affirmation that the solution is not just out of whack. But yeah, the IP, beside showing us that, okay, you can compete in this market, shows us that you can actually bring in a solution that is novel and can potentially break the ceiling.
Very cool. So I'm glad we clarified that. Today we wanted to talk about our experience in aggregate intellect around fundraising, because we're building a technology solution that is, I would consider a deep tech, although some of the investors I'm talking to struggle to understand it. But a lot of our innovation is on the data sets that we're creating, and the uniqueness of those data sets. But that's not where we started. Like on day one, 3 years ago, I think when we started, we had a very vague idea. Like, essentially on day one, my imagination of what I wanted to build was, I just did not like reading papers and technical documents because they're so poorly written. And my initial idea was, what if we got machines to read these and told me what was most important? And it's very interesting that 3.5 years ago when I started, I did not have the depth of understanding that I have today about how capital heavy building a solution like that is. So on day one, my imagination was that, okay, we're just going to bootstrap this. We're going to start building things. And I guess to some extent also I was backed by the fact that I already had a community. There were a couple thousand people involved in community back then. A lot of people were showing a lot of interest. But really this assumption that you could bootstrap a deep tech company, I think, was one of the very first things that I got wrong early on. And later on, I went on to fix that. But that's something that I think took me a while to learn, that building a deep tech solution is going to require a lot of capital, and it's going to take quite a bit of time to achieve. Is that a sort of a trend that you see in companies, or do they usually come with the understanding that you need a lot of money to build what they're building?
That is a no. That is definitely a trend that we see. Companies come, they just randomly ask for a number that they're fundraising. They just throw out 3 million, 5 million, 10 million, and most often than not, what happens is that they just expect that is the amount of money that they need. They have some financial projections that back up the number, but then the problem is that they don't have a clear understanding of how much it takes for that solution to become, I don't know, a bit of positive, how much it takes for that solution to get to a point where a bigger player would take a look at it and say, okay, I want to acquire this company. Or so like it takes some time for us to be able to communicate with most of the companies that, okay, tell us how much you need. And by the time that you have all the money and the expertise that you need, that gets you to a point where you can actually tell me that you are now a well-oiled machine and you're running and you don't need more fundraising, or your next step would be basically taking a lot of equity from public market and expanding massively. Just tell me, when is it that you get to that stage? And most of the companies don't know that. Like if you are a healthcare company, you have a lot of stages that you need to clear on the regulatory side. If you are a technology company, let's say you're working on a specific battery technology, you still have a lot of R&D stages that you need to cover in order to make a product that is able to that you can sell to, I don't know, a car manufacturing company. And the same goes with companies that are working with MLOps. You don't have a clear understanding of how much data sets you need. Basically tells us that, okay, you haven't done your research, you haven't done all the work that you need, and it sometimes comes with a lot of experience that founders gain over the path of creating the company, and sometimes comes with the fact that as a founder you're more optimistic about your solution. But I can tell you that we review over, like I personally review over 600 startups a year. And the progression of these companies from being an idea or a product that is in an early stage, getting to a point where they have their fundraising, and then after the fundraising stages, shows us that most of the founders are actually overvaluing the company, or they're over projecting, or they're very optimistic about the solution, and they don't consider that, okay, 90% of the companies are going to fail, or there are going to be more challenges ahead, and you have to be able to, at least to some extent, expect what are some of these challenges that are going to happen down the way. So that's definitely a trend we see. We don't always expect companies to know what is the exact picture, because no one knows. It's not that a VC knows and a founder doesn't know. No one knows. The only thing that we can do to mitigate that is just we always apply, let's say, a factor of safety for ourselves when we see a specific projection. Yeah. When you tell me I need 2 million, I'm thinking, okay, you haven't included all the things that you need in the process, so you probably need 3.5. And then we try to push you to think of all the challenges and all the things that can go wrong, and come back to me and tell me, what is it that you need now? Is it still 2 million? And most of the times it's not. So it's a common theme.
Yeah. So I mean, to play devil's advocate a bit here, from a founder's point of view, as you say, especially when you're building a solution that is very, very complex, like it's not yet another fintech application for payments, right? It is not yet another digitization platform. It's not yet another food delivery platform, right? So you are building something that, the business side is unknown, the market side is unknown, the technology side is unknown, et cetera, et cetera. Like, even the product itself requires probably several years to even become an MVP. Like you might have a lot of feasibility experiments, but ultimately putting it all together to become an MVP is going to take a few years potentially. So it is very, very difficult to even think about what the future is going to be like and how much money is needed to get there, right? So sometimes you might get lucky and get there faster. A lot of the time you won't. Like you have to go through a lot of mistakes. And as you say, like building in margins of error is very helpful. And I remember the very first time that I sat down and wrote a budget, it was because, it was after the period of time that I went through trying to bootstrap the company and then learn, oh, well, actually, we need way more money. I don't think that's going to be plausible. So the first time that I sat down and wrote a budget, I wasn't even doing it because I thought that it was a necessary thing for my business. I was doing it because I was told, if you want to talk to investors, that's one of the things they're going to ask for. So to have the checklist, I sat down and wrote a budget. And even that took me, I had worked 3 years in industry. I had worked in academia for many, many years and worked with budgets and money and all of these things before. But doing it for a startup, for a business that you own all the parameters of it, it took me a lot of time to get to the point to understand the value of what you're describing. The value of you need very detailed rigor about what the future is going to be like. And more importantly, when you're creating that rigor, that plan, that budget for the future, that understanding that this is your current understanding, you have to be ready to continuously evolve this. This is not something that you're going to do once and then you're going to forget about it. So that phase transition, that mindset transition, I think was very, very valuable for myself to go from, oh, this is just a checklist item investors expect, to being like, wait a minute, this is actually going to determine how much money I need to run this business and build this product, et cetera, et cetera.
So one of the things that we are going to talk about in the series is just different ways of fundraising, obviously. So, but what I want to add is that no matter what the fundraising process is that you think is going to be the best for your solution, you need that budget, you need that financial projection, and you need to build various scenarios. And then the last piece of information that I will add is that no matter what financial projection you make, it's going to be inaccurate. So it's going to change, it's going to get updated, you're going to get new information, and you have to be ready to change that financial projection anyways. But it's essential, no matter what path you take for bringing in the required fund for your business, no matter what your business is, and it's going to be inaccurate.
Definitely. Sometimes I wonder if I would have been a successful entrepreneur if I had done some traditional business, like, worked in a small mom and pop shop for a while to at least learn the ledgers and accounting and all of those things they have to do, because a lot of those fundamentals are the same. Ultimately, you're running a business. Ultimately, you're building a product to sell, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of those, rigor in trying to capture all of the transactions that need to happen for this product to be built is very necessary. And a lot of folks like you and I that come from academic background, we like to start to sit down and think about complex problems and write formulas and blah, blah, blah. But ultimately, the things that mostly, I guess you probably have way more experience than I do in this, but probably the thing that breaks a lot of the businesses and a lot of the startups, deep tech startups, is that they completely underestimate how much it takes, how much money it takes to build. And they start with some imagination. Maybe they get lucky and raise some initial money, through a hype in a market or whatever, but then they fail to show any sort of meaningful milestone. And again, like that's very difficult to set up, like it is predicting the future. But being able to set that up and understand why you're doing it and do it in a way that can be modified easily, I think is very important. Like pragmatically, what we found eventually, what the technique that we are using currently is even forget about the product, forget about financial forecast, forget about all of these. Sit down and decide what is your growth story. How is this thing going to grow? Like regardless of how the very detailed descriptions of what you're building, but then based on that, can you write with some details what are the milestones that need to be achieved, and then how much money is necessary for all of those. And only when we started thinking about it that way, it became much clearer for us how to deal with this, how to use it as an asset instead of just a checklist item. And for example, writing down the assumptions in a part where we can just quickly change them and see how the future will change, it is so valuable. It's something that first we were just hard coding everything, but then I learned, just have a separate sheet for the assumptions, because those are the things that are going to change. And investors love that too. Like whenever an investor asks me, when is your business going to be profitable? And I normally say, I'm going to tell you a number, but both of us know that that's wrong. So what you're really asking me is, are you making good assumptions? And here is my spreadsheet with my assumptions. Look at these, play with them, see if that makes sense to you. And all of them do a smirk like you did, and go on and play with the spreadsheet and see if they like it.
Awesome. Yeah, one thing that I have heard a lot from VCs and from startup founders, specifically deep tech ones, that don't have let's call it a business expert on the team, is that the VCs think that the deep tech founders are too technical, and that is an unfair assumption from an investor, because a too technical founder is needed to be able to run this business. A too technical founder understands the business, understands the customer, is able to make the sales. Sure, they might not know a couple of jargons that is used day to day on a business side, but they definitely are built for this to be able to scale up the solution. If there are things that they don't know, I think we should ask them to learn. Being a deep tech founder means that you have done a lot of more challenging stuff than just learning about jargons, learning about how to play with spreadsheets, learning about how to create financial projections. So one thing that I advise every founder do is that don't think that because they have a technical background, they can't learn the business, or they're not made to learn the business. That's just an excuse. And every deep tech founder can also add on to their business knowledge, get more, do an online course of some sort on accounting. You don't need to work in a mom and pop shop to learn about ledgers. You can learn that with 10 hours of online course. And that would be enough, honestly. The rest will come to you. And I think the rest should come from the investors. The investors should be able to support the founder throughout the way. If they think that the company is now large enough that it needs a CFO, then okay, let's have a fractional CFO of some sort that can help the CEO. But that's definitely a recurring theme that I've heard, that okay, the founders are too technical, which I don't agree with.
That reminds me of a bit of a bitter memory of the first year I started. I was talking to an investor. He was a friendly investor, and I'm sure he was saying it to help me. But 5 minutes into the conversation, he interrupts me and he's like, "Do yourself a favor and find yourself a business partner," which is literally what you're saying. Obviously, on the first probably even 3 years, I didn't know the jargon. I didn't know the importance of, keeping proper accounts and, predicting the future based on those, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm sure I sounded, like I didn't know what I was talking about on the business side. Like I'm sure there was a significant factor of that, but that perceived notion of this person doesn't even have the potential to learn those things, I felt it so much in talking to investors, and that was so demoralizing for me. Like, as somebody who has just toughed through it, I was like, I don't give a fuck. I'm going to keep going. And I think I will figure it out. And I think I'm in a much better place. And these are not rocket science. Like, these are simple things. A lot of people know how to do it. It is detailed, it is rigorous, but ultimately it's not rocket science. It's just mostly very simple regressions that you're doing, very simple accountings that you're doing. But learning, I think what a lot of technical founders miss is the relevance of it. Like, they don't feel like it is an important part of what they're doing, while it is the most important part of what they're doing. Because if you can't fund your project, you don't have a project. And I wonder what the right way is to help founders, be more educated on things, because we have spent a lot of time talking about how can we teach people about, educate people about AI and its impact on business, quantum, Web3, etc. But we don't spend enough time talking about the other way around. Like, how can we enable technical people to build products with the business mindset? I don't know what, other than waiting for an investor to come in and educate you or tell you to get a CFO. What are some of the ways that you've seen founders gain insight and learn to appreciate the importance of that side?
So, and I just want to clarify that we are not saying that a founder must be as good as an accountant, a CPA, because there's a reason that we have CPA accountants and there's a reason that we have CFAs, and the CEO doesn't need to be doesn't need to have the knowledge of a CPA or a CFA, and that's not what we are asking. What we are just asking is that for the founder to be able to communicate in a language that translates into relevant financial metrics, how this business is going to grow and evolve over time. And I've worked with a lot of technical founders. Not all of them have PhDs, but let's say a technical founder that has PhD, they're obviously very smart. They have spent a lot of time in school. They have they're the experts of the subject matter that they are working on, and the side of the spectrum where the founder is very savvy, they have just spent the time to learn about all of these things on their own. It is not a complicated thing. It just shows the investor and shows your team members that as a CEO, you're evolving and growing with your role. And that's your responsibility as a technical co-founder, just to be open to evolve and learn new things, because there are a lot of things that not everybody knows. And you just need to be able to pick on them as you're growing. And that's the, I think, nature of being a startup founder. You might be the CTO of a startup company. You might have the technical background that is relevant to your specific field, but you might not know how a product manager works. Just as simple as that. As a CTO of a startup company that is small and doesn't have a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of resources, your role as a CTO is to grow and evolve with your role, learn about product management. If you don't know about agile programming or techniques, then it's your duty to learn that. The same goes for the CEO. The CEO is very technical. They don't know about specific, accounting principles. They don't need to become an accountant. They can always hire an accountant, but they just need to understand the concept and be able to communicate properly with the accountant. And on the other side, you're mainly talking about investments, but be able to also talk some financial jargons with the investors.
Yeah, 100%. One thing that has particularly helped me was last year when I started fundraising for the first time. So after trying the bootstrapping, I started doing a fundraising round. So I talked to a lot of angels and VCs, and let's say it didn't go as well as I thought it would. But one of the things that I learned about myself was that initially I didn't sound very confident when I was talking to them, because of some of the encounters that I had when I started at the very beginning. like the example that I gave, I had a lot of insecurities around the business side. Like whenever I was talking about it, I was very, very tentative. And that significantly impacted how I carried myself in the conversation. Like when I was talking about the technical side, when I was talking about a product, I was excited, I was jumping up and down, blah, blah. But whenever I was talking about the business side, I was, hesitant and tentative. And I'm sure they pick it up within 2 seconds. And a lot of my advisors were like, you should be confident, you should project confidence, blah, blah, blah. And nobody was able to tell me why I was having that problem. So a very, very important, I think, transitional point for me last summer happened when I sat down and I thought about why is it that I cannot project confidence. And what I learned about myself as a technical founder is that I cannot fake it. I have to be confident about what I'm saying. Like a lot of business people are comfortable, like people with MBAs and whatever, might be trained to say things that they're not certain about in confident ways. And everybody knows that, okay, he's saying it confidently, but it is known that there is some margin of error, probably 30, 40% margin of error on everything they're saying. But I cannot do that. As a technical founder, I'm trained to say things that I'm confident about, and even then say them tentatively. Like say, to the best of our knowledge, blah, 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 right? Like that's how we were trained as scientists, as engineers. So that realization about myself, I think was very, very valuable because that forced me to sit down and understand the rigor of the business side, understand the rigor of, financial forecast and budgeting and things like that, and how those relate to my product and engineering milestones. And it was only then that I think my story started coming together. Like this year, when I talk to investors, within 2 or 3 minutes, I start to get in a very good group with them. And the reason is that now I'm projecting confidence. And the reason for that confidence is that I've done the math. I know if we hit these parameters, then we are going to get these outcomes. I know that it is a dotted line into the future. I know it might change, but at least I know what my knobs are. And because I know those, I talk about it a lot more confidently. So I think even for the very, very minimal fact of helping yourself be confident when you talk to investors, going through this rigor is so, so important. That was such an important change of mindset for me that I went from, oh God, I have to think about these things and tell investors to the point that I was like, wait a minute, in order to have confidence, I need to know how these things work, because otherwise I cannot project confidence.
Yeah, and on your point about faking it or not deeply understanding the topic and be able to let's call it selling the idea. I think a full-time investor at least talks to maybe 2-3 founders a day for years or for some time at least, and seeing that many people pitch would give. And this investor person might not have the operational expertise, might not have the deep tech expertise or anything, but just psychologically, I think they have spent enough time seeing people pitch that if you're faking it, or if your voice is shaking, or if you are rubbing your hands together and you're not feeling confident, they can see through it. It's very easy to pick up and see that a founder is not confident. It's very easy to ask a simple question and see the founder is stuttering and is not able to deliver an answer. So what is it that you have to do as a founder? Is definitely spend some time thinking while you're not confident, to spend some time thinking that how you can actually bring in that confidence that allows you to deliver the message that you believe in. You believe in the solution that you're creating. Tell the investor that be able to deliver that message to an investor in a way that the investor also picks up that, okay, this is actually a solution that is going to change something. You might need to hire a coach that tells you tough things and to do and to change. You might need to do that, and that's something that you can do as a founder. This can be an actual coach that you pay, or it can be your friend who tells you that, okay, you are actually rubbing your hands together, or you're not confident, or you're not talking properly at some point. So that's definitely a must-have, and something that founders, deep tech founders specifically, as you mentioned, who are not trained to deliver a pitch, they have to work on, because that can be that Achilles heel for your fundraising. That can be the point where you can't communicate properly, and I've seen a lot of that. So that's definitely very important. So this is like next to the business knowledge, next to being too technical, being able to communicate properly. What is the message that you're delivering? What is it that you're building, and how it's going to change everything is key.
100%. So that retrospective about myself really taught me that, like the data point for me was, why am I so confident talking about technical topics, but when it comes to business topics, I'm like, I actually did take a non-verbal language course at Mars Discovery District. That was very interesting, and it triggered some thinking about, okay, what does it mean when I'm like, or so all of those was very, very interesting to see and observe. But I think it was very, very fundamental for me to realize how important it was to pay attention to the relationship I had with the information that I had, because the information that I was sort of hand wavy always made me very nervous, while the information that I had a good grasp on was very helpful. So, and I think that made a huge difference. I want to also transition us, since we are coming to a close, transition us to also different types of funding that could be available for startups in general, but startups in deep tech. So, as we discussed, there is a lot of money needed. So does that mean that essentially VCs are the only route to build a deep tech company?
I was thinking maybe we can relate back to you and your story, because you have spent some time figuring out on your own what sort of fundraising solutions are out there available. And I think your story would be very relatable to most of the deep tech founders that we have out there. So why don't you tell us how you started? What was your initial idea about fundraising? And then what were some of the things that you picked up on the way?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the slight difference that I had was that, I had the idea of starting a company when I was wrapping up my postdoc. But, what I was not confident about was the financial backing to do it, at least personally, but also, a bit of business acumen. So that's why I worked for a corporate for 3 years. And I remember in one of the first weeks on that job, I went to the bank advisor to get some investment advice, like, should I put my money in this investment account or that investment account? And the guy was like, okay, what is your goal? Like, what do you want to do with this money? Do you want to buy a house? Do you want to buy a car? And it was like, no, I want to start a business. So whatever account is necessary for that, let me do that. So very intentionally, during the 3 years that I was working in a corporate, I saved money because I knew I was going to start a company. So when I started my company, I was very confident that from at least a personal point of view, I could support myself for 2 or 3 years. My very stupid assumption was that, I'll figure it out in a year. I have 2 extra years of backup, and et cetera, right? So that was how things started, just funding through my own personal savings. And even the costs, since we had a community, we tried to get a lot of, volunteers to help, but that never worked, obviously. So then we started, thinking, okay, what if we started selling things? Like, what if we started doing workshops? Like, people would pay us for that. So that was the idea of the bootstrapping. So for a while, we tried to bring in money through doing workshops, and then we switched to a content subscription model, et cetera, et cetera. So there was some money coming that never scaled as much as we wanted, but at least it was supporting the initial engineering experiments that we needed to do. Up to a point that I realized, and at that point I had left my corporate job, focusing full-time on a company. So the money that was coming in had stopped. So a few months after that, I had the realization that we need way more money. And we cannot keep doing the workshops and trying to build a product, because it's just, a lot of our time is going into doing the workshops. We don't even have time to build the product. So we are doing the workshops to raise money to build a product, but then we are left with no time to build a product. So
you realize that bootstrapping doesn't work, and your way of bootstrapping was using your savings from the previous job to fund yourself and create workshops that you can sell in the meantime to generate some revenue, and then using your fund and the generated revenue to be able to run the business and build a product. That was your way of bootstrapping.
Exactly. Except that since I didn't know how to do this properly, I never had sat down and calculated how much money I needed. And at one pace, it had to come in order for us to be able to actually build this. And let alone the secondary effects of, if we are making money here, we are spending time and opportunity cost on actually building the product. So, and that's when I, for the first time, about a year and a half in, started thinking, wait a minute, bootstrapping is not going to work for the product that we want to build, because it is, very, very complex product from a technology point of view, from even the product design point of view, let alone the implementation. So we started talking to investors. We ended up raising a small amount of money, mostly through connections in our community. And our community has been superbly valuable in many, many ways, including this fact that they introduced us to their relatives, they invested themselves, etc. So a lot of sort of angel checks came from community and their relatives, but I didn't get any good traction with the VCs. But regardless, we used that money to bring in more developers. We continued building. But, 2022 was a drastically transformational year for us, because I went from that typical technical founder that you were talking about to somebody who started appreciating, okay, these are not just checklist items. These have functionality. I have to think about a business side. I have to have a very good handle on it, et cetera, et cetera. And, I realized that late in 2021, but really internalizing that took about a year, maybe, to the point that today, I'm very confident about, okay, these are our projections for cost. These are projections for growth and revenue, et cetera. And now I see it very well that, again, we are opening a fundraising round. We have taken a bunch of angel checks. We have very advanced conversations with a bunch of investors. We are starting a crowdfunding campaign. So we are doing a few different things, and hopefully we are going to combine all of those to close our round eventually, hopefully before the end of the year. But the dynamic of my conversations with investors is so different now. Like when I enter the conversation, I can see very clearly that I can tell them what our story is, where we are going, why we are doing this. And now, I'm finally starting to understand how to talk to VCs, how to interpret their questions, how to interpret the body language. And all of these are so, so important. So overall, we've tried almost all the options that existed in terms of fundraising. I don't think we tried any of them properly. But, ultimately they say, you do what you have to do to build a startup. And I think we've been doing that. I had the luxury of having enough saving to try all the mistakes. But for a lot of founders, I think thinking about it on day one and having rigor is very important. As you say, getting a coach that tells you all of these ideas that you have, all of them are BS. You have to think about it in these particular ways. And of course, as founders, we are very stubborn about our ways and we have to make the mistakes. But hopefully that at least reduces the cost of mistakes a little.
Awesome. And so your second method, I just didn't want to stop your flow, but so your second method after bootstrapping was friend and family around. So even though you think that at the time you were not very business savvy, thinking in business terms, you were able to close something that could push the product development forward. So friends, family, community, those who were more, let's say, forgiving on the business knowledge that you could bring forward, and knew you as a person and trusted you as a person and invested in your round, like however much, however small, but they contributed to that. And then as time passed, you realize that you're actually learning new things. You're getting deeper into why these other institutional investors are not paying a lot of attention to you, and then you realize that their requirements are actually the requirements that you need for a successful business. So you spend some time and try to dig deeper and have a better understanding of your business side as well. And once you had that, then you could go back to angels who write more frequently checks, and now they could see that, okay, you are coming, you have changed a lot, you have learned a lot, and you now have a clear path in front of yourself. And so angel was the other way, obviously larger checks, maybe 25, maybe 50K checks, or maybe higher. We can spend 1 minute and talk about crowdfunding as well. I'm not obviously as experienced as you are, or not experienced at all on that one. So why don't you talk about the crowdfunding a bit?
Yeah, that's actually a very, very interesting one. I think, as you said, in the community, in the, quote unquote, friends and family round that we did last year, one of the very, very interesting data points that I gathered was people who knew me personally were very comfortable giving me money. Like, we got 25K checks, we got 15K checks. Even people who sort of knew me through a second connection, very comfortable giving me checks. But as soon as I got to people who were relatively cold, like it was just a cold introduction, or people who were not even a cold reach, like somebody had introduced me, but that person, the partner, didn't know me personally. Or they were actually more serious professional investors who have higher bars and whatever. I was completely failing. Like, there was nothing going through there, and that was part of the reason that I started to educate myself and learn more. And then we again started this year. When we started raising this year, the interesting data point was that a lot of people from the community were reaching out saying, "Hey, I see you're fundraising. I've gotten a lot of value from this community. I have my job through this community. I have my promotion through this community. I found my employees through this community. Can I invest?" And, we say, okay, our minimum is 25K. And they say, oh, actually, I was thinking 2, 5, 10, And when enough of these incidents happen, we started thinking, wait a minute, like, can we do something? Because, we're building a product that is an overlap of community and artificial intelligence, crowd intelligence, and AI. And the community has been part of our journey from, day minus 360, right? Like, the community started way before the company. So they are essentially helping us build this over the years by giving us feedback, by using our very, very crappy product that was launched, a year and a half ago, and giving us feedback. So it was only meaningful for us to engage them. So we looked into options, and there are these regulation changes, fortunately, in the past 2 years, where non-accredited investors can invest up to $10,000 in private companies. And that regulation allowed us to now start bringing a lot of retail investors. And there are, platforms in Canada that do that. There are platforms in the US that do that, and probably global places. But ultimately, the goal is, if you have a community, if you have an ability to market and mobilize them, you have the option to essentially bring them in as your supporters, as your fan, as your Patreons, who will invest some money, acquire some equity in the company, but essentially allow you to run for a little longer to show more evidence from the product development, from the commercial traction, as you're talking to the more bigger, more serious investors.
Awesome. And then basically the last step is the venture capital investment, where the check size is obviously larger. it is often larger than 250K. And depending on your round, it can be much larger as well. But the complexity of investors and the fact that the investors are running a purpose-driven fund, and they have limited partners, and they have to be responsible toward their limited partners, so they have much tougher requirements for investing in a startup company. So that's basically the last stage of bringing in that money at the earlier stages of growth and development of the company, and hopefully we'll see you secure some of that as well by the end of this year.
Hopefully. I mean, one option that we talked about many options like friends and family, angels, community round, VCs. One option that we didn't talk about, but I see a lot of deep tech founders do is, accelerators and incubators, creative destruction lab, YC, et cetera, et cetera. So that option also exists, but we never tried them very seriously, mostly because I was just too stubborn, I think, to take them seriously. But in hindsight, I think that would have saved us some time if we had taken them seriously. But also, one misconception that I had, and a lot of people have, is that these are there to help you build, while ultimately they are investors and businesses as well. So they have their own specific thesis and plans and projections about what kind of companies to invest in to make what kind of money. So had I spent more time understanding that, and had I applied to these entities more rigorously and with more knowledge, I think those would have also helped us accelerate our process, probably access some mentors that would have been very helpful, etc. So that's also an option that we didn't use, but definitely a lot of deep tech founders can definitely use. There are many good options, YC, Techstars, etc., etc. But yeah, like the combination of all the above is ultimately to give you enough fuel to get enough leading indicators of success, so that ultimately you can get money from big investors, so that you can actually build your products and take it to market and go through a bit of a hamster wheel of raising money, building, selling, etc., until hopefully at some point you have enough revenue to support yourself, etc. But yeah, that's the hope to essentially for us to get there in the next few months, given everything that we've done so far.
Awesome. And yeah, one thing I wanted to add is, having worked at one of these organizations at least, is that there are obviously different flavors, some different types of agreements. Some of them, they don't charge any equity. Some of them, they do charge some equity. Some of them would invest in you. Some of them don't invest anything. But one thing just for founders to be aware of is that you don't want to be the founder that is spending their time all the time in these accelerators. You obviously need mentorship. So like choosing one or two of them is natural and normal to gain the experience and the mentor's attention and a warmer network that can support you. But spending all of your time from one accelerator to the other is also not a good use of a founder's time.
No, 100%. One of the very, very good advices I think that I got early on about that was that, like pretty much everything else in life, you go to one of these accelerators, incubators, when you almost know exactly what you need. And you go to these to essentially cover that weakness, to essentially not cover it, but like to treat that weakness.
And most founders think that they need money. And let's just, for the sake of securing money, go to these incubators and accelerators. And what I would say is that some of these organizations offer way more than money. And if you are able to secure those bases, the money will flow. That proper mentorship, a network of mentors who have industry experience, this is definitely more valuable and long lasting for a founder than just money. Because you definitely need that smart money, not just any money.
100%. And I think, as you said, a very important part of it is to understand what are the mechanics that you have to have in place to be able to convince anybody to give you money. And if you have not done your homework of educating yourself about what those mechanics of a business, of a product, of a technology is, then even if the mentor is telling you whatever they're telling you, you're not going to appreciate it and understand it and really be able to activate on it. So having done your homework before going into accelerators or while you're doing an accelerator, I think is very, very important, rather than being, as you say, singularly focused on who can introduce me to investors, right? So fun conversation, Moien. But let's wrap it up. What's your verdict for people who have watched this episode?
I think the just going through your experience was very valuable. I think founders would find that very relatable. Just starting from thinking about the idea, going through the process of thinking about where the money would come from, how to fund the project, is something that every founder would go through as they're thinking to scale. We talked about different types of investments, from bootstrapping to friends and family, crowdfunding, and VC and angels, obviously, but I think the ultimate verdict is that there is no one solution for founders to look for. There's not just one way of fundraising and being able to fund the product. Not all startups are equal. Not all businesses have to be startups. Your business can be a successful small business. It can also be a startup. Obviously, figuring that out is also very important. And we also talked a lot about how deep tech founders, and again, based on your experience as well, have to evolve in the process of building their solution. And as they are commercializing their product, there are many things that they don't know. If they can actually evolve and learn more about these things that they don't know, if just figuring out what are the things that they don't know and then spend the time to learn about it is very important. We talked about that business knowledge, and we talked about that financial aspect of things, and how to be able to communicate with anyone, not just investors, but anyone is obviously key. Yeah,
fantastic. I think as technical, as founders in general, we are probably known for our intellectual curiosity, but I think we have a bit of a bias because we are very selective about what we're curious about. A lot of the time, we are very curious about the technology and the product aspect, and find the business side very boring. But especially as a founder, CEO, even all the other roles, really, like even a CTO, it's very important to be very open-minded and be curious about everything. So it's not only things that you're comfortable being curious about; it is also things that you're uncomfortable, but probably are the most important parts of your business, because ultimately you're a business, which means you have to deal with money. So going through that transition and evolution is very, very important. And the earlier you go through it, the less painful the journey will be. So talk to my verdict, my advice is talk to people who have done it, because they can tell you about their journey of getting to that transition. And hopefully that can save you some time and pain and headache and sleepless nights. But ultimately, you as the founder, you have to learn everything. You cannot assume that I will bring in advisors, I will bring in employees, I will bring in whatever else to solve those problems. You cannot escape. You have to face it head on. On that note, thank you so much, Wayne. This was a fun conversation. Thank you so much, the audience, for watching this episode. Hopefully we'll see you next week or a week after on another topic, and very soon about another investment related topic. Thank you so much. See you next time.